Shalom Yasharahla. First of all, I want to give all praises to Yahweh Ba'Hashem Yahushai, to the 144,000 elect, and to the 1/3 of all men, women, and children of the nation of Yasharahla that is coming back to these law, statutes, and commandments in these last days. So today we got a special episode. We're going to be talking about the Feast of Dedication, or Hanukkah, which is actually going on right now. And this is arguably one of the most pivotal, one of the most game-changing feast days of them all. Why? Because number one, it's loaded with prophecy. Number two, it represents the rededication of the faith of the Jews. And number three, it is just another time where we know for a fact that the Lord's presence was here on that day, which is what makes it a holy day. Now you have a lot of people during this time, they're getting ready to celebrate Christmas. They're getting ready to celebrate, Kwanzaa, all these other wicked holidays. And then you're going to have a whole slew of other holidays, Valentine's Day and other days that have nothing to do with the Lord. Vain holidays. But with Hanukkah, you can assure that the Lord's presence was here. So we're going to get into this story of the Maccabees, and we're going to understand why Hanukkah should be a holiday to be remembered. So let's set the scene. This is right after the time of the Persians, when Alexander the Great conquered the Persians and the Medes and rose to power. Now, Alexander is somebody that you probably learned about in school, so-called Alexander the Great. Now, we didn't call him that. This is what society calls Alexander. Why? Because Alexander the Great was the greatest so-called Caucasian or Edomite that ever rose to power. He was there at the beginning when they conquered the Persians and they became the military force to be reckoned with, right? And this story actually begins in the Apocrypha. Now, Hanukkah was prophesied by Daniel in the Old Testament, and it occurs in between the Old Testament and the New Testament. In the New Testament, it was celebrated by Yahushai, right? So let's go and get that. This is the book of John, chapter 10 and verse 22. And it was at Jerusalem, the Feast of Dedication, and it was winter. And Jesus walked into the temple in Solomon's porch. So we know that Yahushai celebrated the Feast of Dedication. So for those who might want to say that, oh, this Apocrypha was not inspired by God, wait a minute. You have to connect the dots, because the events that created Hanukkah can only be found in the Apocrypha. So the fact that Yahushai celebrated it and Daniel prophesied it in the Old Testament, let's go to the Old Testament. Let's get that scripture. This is the book of Daniel, chapter 11, verse 28. Then shall he return into his land with great riches, and his heart shall be against the holy covenant, and he shall do exploits and return to his own land. At that time appointed, he shall return and come toward the south, but it shall not be as the former, or as the latter. For the ships of Chittim shall come against him, therefore he shall be grieved, and return and have indignation against the holy covenant. So shall he do. He shall even return and have intelligence with them that forsake the holy covenant. And arms shall stand on his part, and they shall pollute the sanctuary of strength, and shall take away the daily sacrifice, and they shall place the abomination that maketh desolate. So Daniel is prophesying this man that is going to come and take over the land of Jerusalem and defile the temple and make the place desolate. He's going to take away the sacrifices. He's going to make an holy place unholy. All right. So going back to the Apocrypha. So Alexander the Great, okay, or just Alexander, because he's not great to us. This man was a mighty and brutal leader for the Macedonians, which is the land on the northern part of Greece. also known as the Greeks. Before the Greeks took on the name of the Greeks, they were called the Macedonians. Same people, same Edomites. And Alexander pioneered the military force that took over the Persians and eventually became the Greeks. But this guy was a very vile leader. He was into all kinds of sexual deviancies. He was a boy lover. He was into bestiality. He was into anything that walked, he was into that. So he only reigned for 12 years, and he eventually died of some sexually transmitted disease, and it was a wrap for him. But he had already done the damage that his successors would take advantage of, right? So before he died, he had 4 generals that he grew up with, that he divided all the kingdoms that he had accumulated into 4 parts. And one of those generals goes by the name of Antiochus Epiphanes. And Antiochus Epiphanes, he was just like Alexander. He was just as vile. He had no chill. He wanted to continue to expand his empire. So what does he do? He first goes and he occupies one of the lands that the other generals was occupying, Ptolemy. Now Ptolemy, you can go and read about Ptolemy. And what I like about this story so much is that it actually intersects with history. In school, you may have learned about Alexander the Great, right? You may have heard the name Ptolemy before. Whereas whenever it comes to the scriptures, it's always seen as folklore, mythology. But here's where the rubber meets the road, because we're dealing with people who were actually taught in the school books, Alexander and Ptolemy, right? So Antiochus wants Egypt, and he starts to move his military towards Egypt, right? Now this is Grecian on Grecian crime, because Ptolemy is reigning over Egypt, but he knows how fierce that Antiochus was, and he didn't want no smoke with Antiochus. So what did he do? He fled. Antiochus ends up gaining control over Egypt, and then he makes his way towards Jerusalem. So that's the scene. So this is the book of 1 Maccabees, chapter 1, verse 1. And it happened after that, Alexander, son of Philip, the Macedonian, who came out of the land of Chetim, had smitten Darius the king of the Persians and Medes, that he reigned in his stead, the first over Greece, and made many wars and won many strongholds, and slew the kings of the earth, and went through the ends of the earth, and took the spoils of many nations, insomuch that the earth was quiet before him, whereupon he was exalted, and his heart was lifted up. So he was a proud man. He was going around rape, robbing, and murdering, and there was nobody who could stop him. So he was absolutely feeling himself. When Antiochus took over Jerusalem, he immediately started tearing down every custom, every tradition that was there before, which means the law, statutes, and commandments, they were being outlawed. The holy temples, they were being defiled. So what did he do? He went into the holy temple. He had people go into the holy temple. He slaughtered a pig in the holy temple, and slaughtering a pig is an absolute slap in the face of the Lord, because the swine is an abomination to the Lord, right? How do we know that? Let's go to Leviticus chapter 11 and verse 7. This is the book of Leviticus chapter 11 and verse 7. And the swine, though he divided the hoof and be cloven-footed, yet he cheweth not the cud, he is unclean to you. So the swine, the pig, does not properly digest what it eats, nor does it have any discretion over what it eats. So it's always absorbing all kinds of toxins that are malicious to the human body. So if you eat swine, you are basically being malicious to your own body, right? It's unclean, and you shouldn't even touch it. Of their flesh shall ye not eat, and their carcass shall ye not touch. They are unclean to you. So you're not even supposed to be touching swine's flesh. That's how toxic it is. What does Antiochus do? He goes into the holy temple of the Lord where the sacrifices are being held, and he sacrifices a pig on the altar. All right, so that's the defiling of the temple. And he caused all the sacrifices, the righteous sacrifices that the Jews were doing in the holy temple, to cease. He said none of that. So he outlawed everything. No keeping the Sabbath. No Bibles. He was burning Bibles, right? And then he basically turned the holy temple into a whorehouse. So during that time, the Greeks, they were following like Jupiter. They were following the Greek god Zeus and Jupiter, right? And they turned all of the holy places into gymnasiums and whorehouses where they would walk around naked. So it came to a point where Antiochus is now trying to eliminate all other faiths except for the faith of the Greeks. Let's go to 1 Maccabees 1:41. Moreover, King Antiochus wrote to his whole kingdom that all should be one people. So what does that sound like? Antiochus is trying to make sure that everybody is all one. We are all one. We are all united, right? It sounds exactly like what's going on here in America, right? With the LGBTQ community and all these other communities trying to be and coexist as one people. So yes, your religion, my religion, we're all one people. We're all God's children, right? That's exactly what America is actually doing today. But it happened before. It happened during the time of the Tower of Babel, and it's happening right now during the time of the Maccabees, also known as the events that led up to Hanukkah, right? So Antiochus is trying to make sure that everybody is one. But what does he want everybody to do? He wants everybody to put all their religions aside, all their faiths aside, and he wants everyone to come under Zeus and follow the ways of Zeus. That's what he was pushing. And there was also, we're actually going to go back to verse 11, because Israelites started selling out during that time, because the Greeks were lifted up and they were persecuting and killing anyone who was following the scriptures, right? So you were going through hell if you were trying to keep the law, statutes, and commandments in these days, because you were being demonized, you were being frowned upon, and people wanted you dead, especially Antiochus. So in verse 11, it says, in those days went there out of Israel wicked men who persuaded many, saying, let us go and make a covenant with the heathen that are round about us, for since we departed from them, we have had much sorrow. So they were saying, listen, we've been catching hell ever since they came here. Let's just make a deal with them and follow their ways so that we can deliver ourselves, that we can have prosperity. And that is the equivalent of people being a sellout today. All right? If you're trying to get any kind of economic gain, any kind of status, wealth, fame, and you want to sell your soul, meaning you want to put all your beliefs aside, all your integrity, you want to put all that underneath the rug just to make a few bucks and have so-called prosperity, then yes, you're a sellout. And that's what started to happen during this time. So Antiochus wants everybody to be one. He wants everybody to give up all their faith and come under Zeus. Coincidentally enough, it started to work, and people started doing it. People started following Zeus. People were walking in the temples naked. They was celebrating all of their pagan holidays like Christmas, and they were following the ways of the Greeks. As a matter of fact, it was actually illegal to even call yourself a Jew. Let's get that in 2 Maccabees chapter 6 and verse 6. Neither was it lawful for a man to keep Sabbath days or ancient fasts, or to profess himself at all to be a Jew. This is why the Apocrypha is so important, because in the New Testament, it seems like salvation is now being offered to the Gentiles. But the Gentiles was being used in two completely different contexts. Okay, in one context, you had people who were actually Gentiles by birth, who never belonged to the nation of Israel. And then you had Jews who could no longer call themselves Jews or Israelites because of the unrighteous decrees that were coming down from the Grecians during the time of the Maccabees. So they were saying, you can't call yourself a Jew, you can't call yourself an Israelite, you have to call yourself a Greek, just like how people call themselves Americans today. So a part of being a Gentile in the New Testament is understanding that the people that were in Rome and the people that were in Greece, they didn't care about the laws, statutes, and commandments of the Most High. They obviously didn't, because they were defiling the temple. They were walking around naked. They were engaging in all these devious sexual acts. So why would Paul go and talk to them? Paul in Romans wasn't talking to the Romans. Paul in Ephesians were not talking to the Ephesians. He was talking to Israelites who were in those lands in captivity, who could no longer refer to themselves as who they really were, because that was going out of remembrance. He had to go and remind them who they were and to come back to the Father and keep the law, statutes, and commandments. So this was going on. Everybody's selling out. Everybody's giving up the faith, except for a man named Mattathias and his 5 sons. They saw that everybody was selling out. They lived in a small land up on the hill, and they weren't having it. They said, no, we're gonna follow the Lord. Let's get that. So this is the First Maccabees chapter 2 and verse 1. In those days arose Mattathias, the son of John, the son of Simeon, a priest of the sons of Joarib, from Jerusalem, and dwelt in Modin. He had 5 sons: Jonan, called Caddis, Simon, called Thasi, Judas, who was also called Maccabeus, Eleazar, called Abiram, and Jonathan, whose surname was Aphis. These men make up the Maccabees. Now, they weren't having it. They saw everybody around them, and they were probably people who they thought were mighty in the truth, people who seemed like they were zealous in the faith, but the fear that Antiochus was putting in their hearts caused them to put all of this, tuck their pride aside and tuck their faith underneath the rug and call themselves Greeks. But not the Maccabees. The Maccabees said, we will stand for the Lord. Jumping down to verse 27, and Mattathias cried throughout the city with a loud voice, saying, whosoever is zealous of the law and maintaineth the covenant, let him follow me. So he and his sons fled into the mountains and left all that they ever had in the city. So they left everything. They said, you know what? Forget it. Let's leave all this stuff here, and we're gonna go to the mountains, and they're gonna have to come and get us. But we're not going to fold. We are not going to give in to this temptation of people to save their lives, to denounce their faith in Yahweh Ba'Shema Mashiach Yahweh Shai. So they went to the mountain. After going into the city and gathering as many people who wanted to keep the faith, they all went to the mountains. They said, you know what? They're gonna have to come and get us. So the Maccabees are in the mountains, and the people that are following them, right? Or following the Lord, so to speak. And they're unskilled. They don't have any weapons. Antiochus finds out about this, and he sends an army to go and get them. The army gets there, they battle, and guess what? The Maccabees win. The news makes it back to Antiochus, and he's not happy about it. He decides to send a second army, an even larger army, to the mountains to go and get the Maccabees and whoever else is keeping the faith. Because during this time, if you were caught keeping the Sabbath, you were being put to death. If you were wearing fringes, you were being put to death. They see a head wrap on you, you're being put to death. You got a Bible in your hand, you're being put to death. So people were folding easily. So the second army makes it up there, and surprisingly enough, the Maccabees win again. The news makes it back to Antiochus a second time, and he is not having it. After all, We're talking about the guy who took over Egypt and Jerusalem and many more lands during his time. He had a run. He was proud. So he said, you know what? I'm going to send everything I have at the Maccabees. He sent elephants. He sent the whole squadron, the archers, everybody. Everything, every power that he had, he sent it. He was like, you know what? I'm just gonna overtake them. I'm just gonna run over them. And the Maccabees win once again. They end up defeating Antiochus and his army, and were able to come back down from that mountain, clean up the temple, and reestablish the faith of Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushai. Without these events taking place, there would be no Christmas, no so-called Christmas. There would be no remembrance of these law, statutes, and commandments. There would have been no story of Yahushai, because all of the people, all the remnants, the only remnant that was left, they would have all been murdered, and the Greeks would have been able to reign supreme without anyone in their way. So, important takeaways from the story of Hanukkah. Number one, Hanukkah is a day unlike Christmas, unlike Halloween, unlike Valentine's Day, unlike all these wicked holidays that the heathen practice. Was a day where the Lord was actually physically here. Okay? Maybe not on the ground, but his power was exercised through the Maccabees to ensure that this word reigns supreme. As it says in Isaiah 54:17, no weapon that is formed against thee shall prosper, and every tongue that shall rise against thee in judgment shalt thou condemn. This is the heritage of the servants of the Lord, and their righteousness is of me, saith the Lord, Yahweh. So, no matter what you're faced with, because man is always going to try to be one. It happened during the time of the Tower of Babel. It happened during the time of the Greeks and the Maccabees, and it's going to happen again very soon. Man is going to want to try to make everybody one again. But the problem is, God's laws are contrary in righteousness to man's made up laws. Man's laws are flawed. They always have been, and they always will be. So even when you're faced with adversity and it seems like everybody thinks that you're the problem because you want to follow God's laws, we have the stories of the Maccabees to look at and to ensure us that the Lord will be with us even in the time of trouble. Even when your back is against the wall, if you keep these laws, statutes, and commandments, the Lord will deliver you from the same. Another important thing to take away from the story of the Maccabees is a lot of people, when they read the New Testament, they believe that salvation is for everybody, right? They believe that the salvation are for the Jews and the Gentiles, meaning the Gentiles are everybody else outside the land of Israel. But that is not the case. Without the Maccabees, you wouldn't understand in its entirety why the Gentiles have two different meanings. Because in Maccabees, as you can see, it was illegal to keep the laws of God. It was illegal to say that you were a Jew. So a lot of what were people saying during that time? You had to call yourself a Greek. Just like in Rome, you had to call yourself a Roman. So without this, without the Apocrypha, you go to the New Testament and you're reading Romans and you're thinking that Paul is going to talk to the Romans. But that's not the case. Paul was doing covert ops in the New Testament to go and speak to Israelites that were calling themselves these Gentile names. That's why they were Gentiles. And the book of Maccabees gives you a prime example of why that was happening. And that's about it for this video. Hanukkah is an 8-day feast that's celebrated on the 25th day of the 9th month of every year, where we honor and remember the time when the heathen overtook the temple, defiled it, outlawed what it meant to be a Jew, and how we overcame it by being diligent and having faith and standing up for the Lord. If one person was edified, the job has been done. Until the next video, happy Hanukkah.